et à toutes. Bienvenue à ce webinaire Soutenir
Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. Is to support the OCS, and I am Gina. I work as the head of the project and with ICoCA. I have Gabi with us from DCAF, the Geneva Center of Governors from the security sector. We are very happy today to talk about the practical guide development process, and we will share with you the communication and information on the private security. The launching of this guide will give us the opportunity to discuss with the panelists about how to work on the capacity building of private security company. So why do we need this practical guide? As you know, the private security sector increased exponentially in many countries during these last decades. It is an activity which is using more than the police, the penitentiary forces, the military, etc. So its economic weight in many governments. We notice that there is a lack of information about the number of these private security companies and their staff, and we don't know exactly about the nature of their operations and activities. The national legal framework, as well as the public policies, are not efficiently regulating this sector. The monitoring and follow-up level is quite insufficient, and this will lead to a higher risk of human rights abuses. In this framework, the civil society is playing a very fundamental role in promoting a better understanding and strengthening monitoring of the activities of the private security. In their work with the organization of the civil societies, DCAF and ICoCA have noticed that we need to focus on the private security. However, many do not have enough information on this industry. Where can we find guides? Where can we find guidance or financing in order to work on this topic? For instance, when ICoCA went to Iraq a few years ago, they organized a meeting between the private security company part of ICoCA and a 10th organization from the civil society. So it was the first time for this organization that they met these companies, the private security companies, and you could imagine that the companies received so many questions. DCAF and ICoCA decided to develop jointly with the organization from the civil society a practical guide which gives an introduction to private security, to international standards, and also which brings guidance to the monitoring of the private security, and which communicates information on the industry, what all this means, and how this guide was developed, and how can it be used in the different contexts. I would like now to give the floor to Gabi. She's going to explain the process, the development process of such a guide. Gabi, you have the floor. Thank you, Gina, for this introduction. As Gina mentioned, I am Gabrielle Priklopilova. I'm from DCAF, the Geneva Center for the Governance of the Security Sector. I am sure that you are all joined in order to hear our panelists from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Therefore, I'm not going to dwell longer. However, let me share with you few information about how these practical guide was developed. Let me share now my screen. So how how did we then develop these guide about the communication on security? Private security was developed. Actually, there were 5 steps. The first steps, you can hear it here. We started with the an analysis, need analysis of the civil society in the field of the private security, and we interviewed 16 civil society organizations, and we conducted an analysis. The conclusions was that the major needs were on the oversight and monitoring of the private security. Next, after having developed a generic content of this practical guide, we tried to customize it to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the process actually was established, which took more than 1 year. And there are actually 13 civil society organizations which conducted researches on private security and on the oversight and monitoring of these private security. We organized this in 10 provinces in Kinshasa, in Kasai Oriental, North Kivu, Maniema, and Ituri. After that, the partners from the civil society validated their research by organizing multi-stakeholder meetings, such as the regulators, companies from private securities, their customers, etc., and the civil society. After the phase of validation in the provinces, we proceeded also to the capacity building, and we wanted to associate the regulator in Kinshasa and also the organization from the civil society, which went also to Kinshasa, North Kivu, and Oriental Ituri. These work was very interesting because it helped us to identify what were the weaknesses of the regulatory framework in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and be assured that these practical guide could be close to the reality of the country. The following step, step 4th, we worked on the capacity building and in 5 provinces based on the practical guide, and by strengthening the capacity of the 75 organization of the civil society, we understood that it was very clear, it was important to clarify the standards on private security, such as the attention, resort to the power, etc. And this helped us to develop such a guide in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The final process was the identification of the next steps. This allowed us to invite the regulator in Kinshasa and the regulators' representatives in North Kivu, Kasai Oriental, Haut-Katanga, and Lualaba, with the civil society in the relevant provinces, and we were able to establish cooperation, especially the collect of data on the private security or the harmonization of training in DRC. As you can see, this required lots of energy and effort, and I would like to thank our colleagues from the civil society in the country who achieved this important work, as well as the UK and the Swiss Federation, which supported us. I'll stop sharing my screen, and now we need to give the floor to our panelists so that they can share their experiences in the development of this practical guide. I am going to introduce them. We have here And while I'm doing this introduction, if the panelists could, turn on their videos, I'm sure that the people would like to see you and meet you. So if it's possible to turn on your video, we have Aimé Kilembe, which is head of division within the Ministry of Interior. Good afternoon. Next, Mr. Eric Kajamba from Observatoire Gouvernance et Paix, OPG. Good afternoon, Eric. Mr. Freddy Kazango from the Observatoire d'études et d'appui à la responsabilité sociale et environnementale, and he is stationed in Katanga. Freddy, could you please turn on the video so that we can see you? We have also Mr. Honoré Kaltamba. He's joining from Chicago, and he's normally stationed in Kinshasa. He is from Securitas Congo. I promise that I'm not going to speak for a long time. Very briefly, I would like to give you an overview about the practical guide so that we can start the discussion. I'm going to reshare my screen, just 1 minute. And here we can talk about this practical guide, which is divided in 3 parts. So we'll start with the civil society and private security governance, then the collecting information on private security, and finally documenting and reporting on private security. You can see that the first chapter will be, the first item for discussion with our partner from Congo, and we will talk about the civil society and private security governance. This chapter is actually addressing the issue of private security and talks also about its characteristics as well as the major challenges relevant to private security. And it closes on the role of the civil society in good private security governance. Just to give you an idea about that chapter, and I suggest that we need to give the floor to the panelists. Freddy, can I ask you, because you were very involved in the development of the practical guide, to tell us about the characteristics of the private security in DRC. And if you can keep your video on, please. Thank you, Gabriel, for giving me the floor. And thank you to the panelists as well as to the participants. In DRC, we shall say the private security companies ensures the assets of the customers, the rolling stocks, the guarding. So these are the services done. But in terms of customers and characteristics, we deal about the banks, public administrations, embassies, international organizations, telecom companies, UN agencies, NGOs, public establishments. There are also the individuals and citizens who also could need this service. And when we started working on the issue, we noticed that the DRC, the legal framework, is not regulating well the private security sector. There is actually no law regulating the sector. There are only few decrees and regulatory acts, and that was observed in terms of weaknesses. and this, of course, can create risks in terms of human rights abuses and in terms of monitoring the sector. And this will not enable us to collect all the needed data, such as the revenue of those companies, the size of the sector, who works where, who are the customers, which services they are providing, what is their training for their agent and staff. So this lack of legal framework do not help the field work, especially in monitoring of the private security. And we concluded that there is a lack of capacity of the regulator to monitor the sector of the private security, despite the exponential increase of private security in the country. The other observation is the confusion between the public sector and the private sector of security. So in Congo, for example, weapons are not authorized, and for these reasons, we need to have mixed team between the security and the police. But again, the tasks are not well defined and clarified. And as I mentioned earlier, and despite all the weaknesses of the legal framework, the regulator do not have the relevant capacities to monitor the private security sector, and it's difficult actually to address all the abuses that have been observed in the sector to ensure the monitoring, and this could create a risk for the civil society because the private companies actually do have some interest, economic and business interest to protect. For this reason, during the work, we try to privilege the multi-actor work so that everybody is involved and that we can have some trust in the coordination and work as well as in the monitoring. So this is an overview about the characteristics of the private security industry in DRC. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Freddy. Thank you for this full presentation. I would like now to give the floor to Honoré and to Eric. Since you participated in the research process, could you please tell us what are the major challenges that you observed in the private security sector in DRC? What have you noticed? What did you observe? Thank you very much, Gabrielle, for associating me to this webinar. There are effectively many challenges that we identified, which are mainly related to governance of the private security sector. And there are also some operational challenges. In terms of governance, and Freddy have already mentioned it, there is all the regulatory aspect which causes a problem. In other words, within the Ministry of Interior, there is an office in charge of managing the private security companies. However, these offices have difficulties to operate properly. And there is also the problem concerning the recording. We have seen that the private company which are located in provinces are either not recognized by the authorities, some authorities, or who have received a license in Kinshasa, but in the province they are operated without being recognized. And on top of that, we don't have enough information, and the regulator at least don't have enough information about these companies. And as mentioned, Freddy, there is a lack of information about how many agents are working, if the companies are in compliance with the tax institution. And so we have just found a list of these companies, and this list was also very confusing because they are companies which are not even part of the private security sector. And for this reason, we thought it was really a matter of governance. In addition, as Freddy mentioned, there is a problem with the legal framework. When the legal framework is not well established, of course, this will create problems related to monitoring and compliance with the standards. So that's this is about as governance is concerned. Now, concerning the operational challenges, I believe one of the problems, for example, the humanitarian law and human rights law are not considered. I mean, we have found, administrative acts and decrees where these human rights are not mentioned. Normally, we should have a division which ensure the training and certify it. However, this service is not operational in the province. So here we tried to find another department in charge of the civil protection, to also take care about the training of the private security companies. And when we looked at the curriculum of the trainings, I mean, nothing is there. And they are only specialized in natural disasters and not in private security training. So we noticed that training is not well structured, well organized, and each company is trying to train its own staff, and there were situations where customers needed to supplement the training. So the consequences of the fact that they pay their training is that the agent needs to stay at home and not being related to others. And we need to check whether there is any abuse of human rights by staying at home. The other issue was related to gender, and especially the participation of women and men is not well balanced. Both among the leaders of the private security companies as well as the staff working, so there is no gender balance considered. Another gap is the concept of real property. Many companies here are under Congolese law, and they belong to the political and military elite. This creates an issue because the question is to know who is owning this private security. And during the monetary work, it's very important to check the owner of the private security, because if you have a political actor owning one of these security companies, so probably he will we found also some rebels mobilized in these private security companies, and this is a very important thing to remember. Moreover, it's important to see how public security, namely the police, supports the private security. And I think this creates an issue. We have lots of traffic of small arms. Security companies are obliged to be supported by the police in a permanent way. They are policemen who are second in private companies and work on a permanent way with them. So here there is a problem of accountability in case there is use of force or any human right abuse. So this is a reality. And the private security companies, even those part of ICoCA, they are working permanently with the police, which is, armed. And the private security are obliged to have the police, and this creates a legal issue. And this is a reality, though, to deal with. So these are all challenges, and I believe they are important in the operation of the private security. Moreover, there is an important element concerning the regulation. We have integrated currently people doing video surveillance, but this is not regulated. And there are those who are using doctor surveillance. Again, this is not regulated by the regulator. There are, as you can see, many challenges, and the other challenge is the civil society organizations, because the topic is quite new, and there are fewer organizations which can, deal with the private security, and the fewer organizations interested in this industry. I think I can stop here, and I can probably come back if there are any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. It was indeed exhaustive presentation concerning all the challenges relevant to the private security governance, information, conflict of interest, regulation, etc. Freddie, do you have any additional thing to complete, or Mr. Honoré, have you solved your technical issue? We have, unfortunately, some technical problems, and you just need to know that we are connecting different provinces from DRC, also connecting from the US and Switzerland, and we just ask your patience for that.
Voilà, j'espère que vous voyez le guide.
I hope you are able to see the practical guide. We are going to start with the second chapter in order to discuss the relationship between the private sector and the public sector. As mentioned Eric, this is one of the challenges in terms of governance. Then we will move in order to analyze the applicable standards, especially in terms of international conduct, and then we'll give you an overview about the different principles.
Voilà, je vais terminer le partage d'écran.
So I'm going to stop the screen sharing.
Alors, afin
And in order to know what to collect in terms of information,
nous avons pensé qu'il était non seulement
we thought that it was important to identify actors from the private sectors and to differentiate the private security from other security actors.
Peut-être qu'il faut muter Madame
Jamais. Jamais.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, j'ai justement dit qu'il afin de
So I
savoir
said, in order to know what information to collect, it is important to differentiate private security from other security actors and to identify what are the private security, and also to know what is the expected behavior of these private actor. Even if the national frameworks are different from one country to another, we thought that the international principles can help as a guidance for the organization of the civil society. We decided, therefore, to describe the major principles in the practical guide by giving you examples and scenarios to help the actor better understand the issue and the principal elements describing the expected behavior. For each standard, we subsequently propose additional questions to help the civil organization society to understand these principles in their reality. For example, a private security agent enters a university and pushes a student. A colleague from the student is a testimony of what happens and would like to complain to the company about this aggressive behavior of the agent. What can do this person? This scenario should call on the readers so that they can think concrete situation and what they can do. Then we proceed with a guide with the principles of the international conduct. For instance, in this case, any company should be able to receive complaints from its employees as well as from the public. It also is required to give information about the concerns and complaints. However, the principles of the code could not be of relevance in all the countries and regions. So we recommend, therefore, to the organization of the civil society to focus on the principles which are more relevant to their context. In DRC, this raises lots of discussions between the organizations of the civil society as well as the representatives of the regulators. I would like to talk to you, Eric, and tell us what are the standards from the international conducts which could be relevant in your province and in your context, and which are the standards which have raised more challenges and discussions in the discussions of these last month. And then Eric, and then Freddy, you can take after that the floor. As it was underlined, the major standards in our context is the management and the governance of the private security companies. This is actually, this creates lots of discussions. And we have also to consider the issue of recruitment. Because we need to have a due diligence, a good investigation before recruitment that should be achieved. And there is also the standard related to a sound and safe environment and well-structured work. So these are the two major elements concerning standards ones. And of course, there is the issue of training. I believe that this is the standards which could be of importance in the environment of DRC. Freddy, do you have the same opinion, or do you have additional information?
Freddy, je pense que tu es sur mute. Voilà. Tu es toujours sur mute, voilà. Ouais.
Je vais essayer de compléter.
Let me complete what said Eric, because in reality, and despite the difference of the different standards, we need to recall that DRC, as a member of the African Union, have done certain initiatives that help them to implement certain principles, such as to fight against terrorism, and also on the reform of the private security published in 2014. Despite that, the African Union did not mention the organization or the bodies. However, they stated that the private company is one of the companies, one of the opportunities, and also they regulating the the weapons for the civil society, and how to hold the small arms. So I think that there are standards which are important, and that can be taken from the African Union, and the fact that the DRC did not ratify the certain international standards, such as the international conduct, the security of the private companies, and the voluntary principles. So there are many initiatives and opportunities which could help DRC,
notamment dans le cadre de la réglementation du secteur,
namely in regulating the sector, and find something more efficient. And since the country does not have a law enter present, we believe that these different norms and international standards and different opportunities can help and fuel debate at a national level, so that the legislator can draft legislation in compliance with international standards and customized to the reality of the country. This is what I wanted to add to Eric. Thank you very much, Freddy.
Il y a quelques normes, surtout la gestion des entreprises.
We see that there are yes, we have seen that we talked about the recourse to the use of force in the weapons, the training. We have seen that there are many challenges, but now I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Kilembe. And how do you think we can effectively and efficiently apply the standards in the context of DRC? You have the floor, Mrs. Kilembe. Thank you. I can say that these standards could be applied on each actor, starting with governmental authorities. However, we need, before to raise awareness about these standards, both among government officials or among the organization of the civil society, because until present these standards are unknown to them. Personally, I think in our level, we believe that we need to ensure the implementation of these standards. However, the problems, as mentioned by a colleague, DRC did not ratify many conventions or code on this matter, related to this matter. Therefore, we need to start from this step first. I think with the help and assistance of the civil society and from the government side, we can together conduct advocacy in order to ratify these codes. We have a new government, and I think that it's high time that we can convene to see how we can work and present to the government some draft of a code and a code draft, and try to push the authorities to be involved so that we can adopt these laws. That was my contribution so far. Thank you very much for this contribution. I think the work with the civil organization and during these last months have indicated that the collaboration between the CSOs and the government is very important, and is only together that it is possible also to raise awareness about these standards. I would like now to give the floor to Gabby to give us a quick presentation on the last chapter about this practical guide. Thank you very much, Gina. I'm going to share the screen. The third chapter is related to documenting and reporting on private security. Of course, we are going to again ask the panelists how we can apply this in DRC. Actually, we tried to list all the information and data that the civil society shall collect in order to share information. So when we look at the private security, there are some data to collect, for instance, the attire, the uniforms, to be able to identify them, the customers, etc. Next, the guide is now talking about the information and communication, and deals about the information needed if we want to conduct this activity. It's important to have also the legal expertise. It shall be available, and other services in case of any human right abuse, of if someone is injured or abused. You can see here all the different communication and information mechanisms. There are also certain procedures about claims handlings, and within the company itself, the licensing also process, because these private companies need to have this license in order to work, and the authority would like to know whether they have a problem, there are problems with some of these companies. And the chapter ends about the mechanisms, about the claims handling from ICoCA. Now I'm going to give the floor to the panelists again. Honoré, have you resolved your technical issue? We did not hear your voice. Could you hear me though? Yes, very well. Yeah, now we can hear you, Honoré, as well. I had a technical problem with the computer, and now I'm using both my phone and the computer. I hope now it's going well. Good news. So I would like to ask you, why do you think it is important that the civil society should communicate information on private security, and what are the challenges to proceed in this activity? You have the floor, Honoré. Thank you for this question. I think it is important that the civil society should share the information and documents relevant to private security. Because the fundamental role, because if we do documenting, it helps to report any abuses done by private security companies, or done by even the public security agents. So the documenting or the reporting will help us identify abuses done from the private security companies, because when we report the company, so of course the companies are quite concerned about keeping a good reputation and a good image, and therefore by documenting we can proceed to reporting. And thanks to documenting and the communication, we can also do advocacy work, because it helps to conduct changes. And with no documentation, we cannot achieve these advocacy. The advocacy conducted here is with the government, is done with the governments and with the private security companies, because with the government, we are now working, and as mentioned by Freddy, there is a problem with the legal framework, and as an actor of the civil society, we can be able to do an advocacy so that we can replace this draft with another draft in compliance with the international standards. This is the reason for which it's important to do documenting and reporting. Moreover, the victims also can obtain its rights thanks to the documenting. And if there is a lack of information on the abuses, it will be difficult to give the rights to the victims. And as the civil society, our mission is to document facts and see how can we complain and which companies we have to deal with, so that the victims can get their rights. So that were few insights, and that's it, available for questions. Thank you very much. You explained the importance of documenting and collecting information, documenting and reporting, because it's important in terms of human rights abuses. Freddy, could you highlight now the challenges of DRC in order to to reestablish the rights of victims, or make advocacies, or ensure that the private security companies or their customers can realize that their reputation or image could be at stake. I think the biggest challenge in the country is the institutional framework. There is a lack of a clear regulation, and all the initiatives that, which are conducted are not supported by a clear legal framework and not supported by the international standards. And we believe that only by ratifying the international tool, and even with the drafting of a law, will allow us to overcome the different challenges. There are already some dialogues being conducted in provinces, and they are discussing about the issue, but it's not enough, because it's not binding, and this will not give back the right to the victims. And so I would like that the panelist will add his point of view in terms of the biggest institutional challenge. Eric, I think Freddy asked you a question. Could you please respond? Thank you. A multi-actor dialogue, or multi-stakeholder actor could be an interesting approach, and we have experienced this in our research department, and I believe all the stakeholders present during the meeting say that these multi-stakeholder framework can help in order to strengthen the trust among the actors, and we can resolve the problem in the sector. I fully agree that the civil society traditionally speaking, was the watchdog about what is happening in the society, and I am sure that the role is very important. But in order to achieve this, we need to work on capacity building. We need to have the capacity to achieve this work. And I think that the capacity of the CSOs should be increased in the field of the private security. And they need to know the standards, both at a national level and an international level. And as a CSO, we really need to work on this issue and do some networking with others in order to see how we can help and in order to also improve the governance within the private security. And I think that the CSOs will have to play a major role. And Honoré have listed a few points, and I fully agree with him with all what he said. In other contexts, Freddy can agree on that. For example, in the elaboration of the mine code. Yeah. So there are, lots of breakouts. So the civil society can play a role in implementing the law or in elaborating the law, so that we can include all the elements relevant to the interest of the community These are the challenges related to the civil society. Thank you very much, Eric. I suggest to give the floor to Mrs. Aimé. Now we have this practical guide which addresses the issue of collecting, documentation, reporting on private security. Mrs. Aimé, do you hear us? So you are the representative of the regulator of DRC. How do you think you could work with the civil society in order to improve the private security governance in this big country?
Merci pour la parole.
Thank you for giving me the floor. In order to have a good governance in DRC, and as I said it before, actually there is a lack of legal drafts. However, the civil protection is managing anything related to the private security. With the practical guide, and if we try to implement it, we are going to have a good governance in the sector. As part from the government, the government as well as the private security companies are responsible, and if they try to implement this guide and try to operationalize it, we will assist them. And from our side, we will also do our work. We are aware that it's difficult to manage this sector because the companies are increasing a lot. They are flowering a lot, and there are many companies which are unknown from the Congolese state, and they are working in the field. We are anticipating, or we are going to start an oversight and monitoring a mission in the field. Consequently, we will try to see deeply how these companies are working and how they treat their agents. And we hope also that there will be a reporting system, because in the past, these companies used to give monthly reports. But these private security companies used to issue monthly reports. Mrs. Aimé, could you hear me? Very well. So you said that the private security companies issued reports in the past, isn't it? Indeed, monthly reports. And then they stopped. And when I arrived, and with regard to the practical guide, I realized that it was important to have these reports. Of course, not all companies issued them, but few of them did. And I hope that this will become an obligation because with the report, we will know what is happening exactly in the field. And we can be informed if their agents, face a problem with a customer, and to inform us. For example, if the agent went to court, we need to be informed. Why now we did not have this information, and we hope to spread this report so that all companies could draft monthly reports in order to ensure a good governance. On the other hand, someone spoke about the uniform. When a company wants to take a license, they need to also bring a model of a uniform, while today companies are no longer doing this, and we have seen that there are different uniforms, and therefore we requested for pictures. Each company should take a picture of the agent with the uniform, and then we will have a photo book so that all the newly established companies shall not have the same uniform as the previous ones, or have logos similar to those which are already in the field, to enable us to differentiate, because when the agents are making abuses, and if the customer is unable to differentiate and to distinguish the uniforms, we cannot be able to know which company is doing the abuse. So this is what can be done in the future. We are going also to have a sheet for oversight and monitoring. We'll have a monitoring sheet for these companies. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Aimé. A bit late, but we have a question here. This is a question for Mrs. Aimé. Freddy, Eric, Honoré, if you could also react with Aimé. So I'm sorry, I have to translate the question. Whether certain organization using this tool or have a functional relationship with the government of DRC in order to do the surveillance and the monitoring of the private companies. Freddy, would you like to start first? Or Mrs. Aimé, would you like to take the floor? Okay, Freddy, you can go. We need to confess that during the multi-stakeholder dialogue, they created a cooperation framework where people can discuss certain issues with trust and without any taboo. The challenge, though, Mrs. Aimé mentioned it, it's important to have they need to have a register to identify the actors in the sector. And today, if you ask the question to the regulator, it's difficult to know how many private companies exist in DRC. And it's a difficult question for him. We don't know how many there are operational, and where and who, what are the companies, and how can we know the abuses and who did the abuses. And it's important to know the locations as well, to know about the violations. So there is important to do a mapping of the actors in the field. Moreover, It's important to know also about the international organization which are unable to identify the private security companies which are in compliance with the state and the regulator. So this is a big challenge, and we hope that with the new technologies, we can establish oversight mechanisms that can help us better regulate the sector. Okay, could we again help Freddy? Eric, could you please help Mrs. Aimé again? I think she has a technical issue, and this is a key moment, and we would really appreciate to have her input. Eric, would you like to talk about the functional relationship between the CSOs and the government? So when you have the documents and the licensing to work, you can work everywhere in DRC. So on one hand, it's important to have the authorization from the Ministry of Justice, but it's also recommended to get a permit from the relevant sector. But the big challenge, and especially when we need to collect information from the Ministry of Interior, it's difficult at the beginning to get the information because you have to deal with a civil servant who is badly paid or who's working in the informal sector, and this creates a problem. But what could help, as mentioned by Freddy, is if we can achieve progressively to establish a multi-stakeholder dialogue. I mean, in my experience, that was quite fruitful and helpful. So it's important to have a dialogue or cooperation as well with the state, and or not, I mean, we need to work together, cooperate together to find solutions. So, and each part, of course, shall play its role. The private companies, of course, they're doing business, while the regulator needs also to work to do its work, and the civil society plays its traditional role. So this is the effort to do. And a multi-stakeholder framework could be a possibility for cooperation and for dialogue and discuss with the member of government. Thank you, Eric. Gina, could you take the floor for the closing? And if Mrs. Ime can join again, I hope we can have her before closing this webinar. But Gina, you have now the floor to close this webinar.
Merci, Gabi.
Thank you, Gabi.
Juste peut-être pour, on a vraiment eu une discussion très riche.
It was a very rich discussion. I would like to now make a summary of this discussion. We have actually mentioned the challenges in the private security sector in DRC. We have spoken about the institutional issue, about the lack of a legal framework, of the lack of efficiency of the legal framework, the ratification of the international conventions, which is also important. We spoke also about the monitoring challenge and the oversight issue. The problem of accountability and the transparency of the relationship between the public and the private security companies. We spoke about the companies themselves, about their management, especially we spoke about the importance about training the staff of the private security companies, especially about the national and international standards, as well as on the human rights. And finally, we focused also on the role of the civil society, and we said it's important to mobilize the civil society, and it was important to strengthen the capacities and work on capacity building. We spoke also on few solutions, especially about the multi-stakeholder dialogue to help and enhance the trust between the actors about the national and international standards, and about the role of the civil society to help the actors and the government to monitor and to oversee the private security companies. I hope that these elements give you already an overview about the whole discussion that was conducted. If you have other questions, please don't hesitate to send them by email to DCAF or ICoCA. We have our email address on the website. We can add them also on the chat column. And I just want now to thank the panelists for their contribution and for discussing with us these very interesting issues, and also to discuss about the launching of these practical guide that could be useful for DRC, but also useful to other countries. I would like to thank all those who participated in this webinar. Thank you very much. See you soon.